On November 29th, 2024, while Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was meeting with President-elect Donald Trump, the president joked that Canada should become the 51st state. At least that's what everyone thought, that this was a joke. And it may have been initially. However, after constantly being asked if he was serious about Canada becoming part of the United States, Donald Trump now says that he is serious. I believe that originally it was a joke. But after saying that he's serious several times, it makes it difficult to change the tone. Canadians and most Americans think that this notion is absurd. Canada has officially been a country for almost 160 years and was largely settled by Europeans in the 16th century. Of course, Indigenous groups existed in Canada centuries before that. I've been to the US several times and spoken with Americans here in Canada, and I've never heard anyone even muse about the possibility until now. Also, is it not better to have two voices on the world stage? If at some point Canada and the United States became one nation, we would only have one voice. I don't think this would serve us well in a world with so many countries with competing agendas. Even if there was more will on both sides of the border for the United States to incorporate Canada or for there to be some type of merger, how would that happen? If Canada was to then fall under the United States as a state or some type of territory, what would that look like? Canada is rich in natural resources and has several unique landmarks and natural wonders. These have been developed and preserved at a great cost for more than 100 years. As with all countries, Canada has its share of problems. Some of these stem from its huge landmass and diverse regions. However, these problems pale in comparison to its assets. So what is Canada worth? What would Canada look like as part of the United States? First of all, there's really no precedent for one large country absorbing another large country in the modern era. In the past, usually this has occurred by force or occupation. We unfortunately see that today with Russia invading Ukraine to annex it. Even Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States, was acquired from Spain after the Spanish-American War in 1898. Spain had already given the island broad powers of self-government. The United States invaded the island during the war, and Spain ceded it to them via the Treaty of Paris. The world has changed greatly in the past century. More recently, it is more common to see a larger country split apart to give more unique governance and a voice to its regions. This is exemplified by the split up of Yugoslavia's region starting in 1990. What was once one country is now 6. I find it interesting that President Trump keeps saying that Canada would be the 51st state of the United States. However, even if Canada was to join the United States, why would it be one state? Currently, it is composed of 10 provinces and 3 territories. I would think at the very least it would become 10 states and 3 territories. It's absurd to think that our provinces and territories would merge into one. Can you imagine New York and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Connecticut and New Jersey and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Delaware all merging into one state? Each state has unique histories, holidays, celebrations, and ways of life, as well as many other individual characteristics. Why would you want to take that away? The same goes for the provinces and territories of Canada. It's already a big challenge to govern such a vast country with so many regional differences and requirements. I'm sure that already some of the smaller states have to work very hard to get proper attention from Washington. 50 administrations is a lot to manage, and I'm often amazed that the country works as well as it does. I believe that this is also why the United States only has 2 major political parties. Trying to introduce another party is difficult over so many regions. In addition, Canada is bilingual. This has caused a lot of conflict in the past due to Quebec threatening to leave Canada. Once again, this would have been a very complex endeavor. To this day, there are still some threats from some voices within the province. There is even a provincial party, the Parti Québécois, that advocates national sovereignty for Quebec. I don't see the province functioning well in the United States, as I know the United States would not give them the special treatment that Canada has given them in terms of language rights, transfer payments, and a minimum level of government representation through our Constitution. What makes Canada unique? Canada is a vast region of the world with many desirable features. It has been developed over centuries by a tremendous effort by its citizens. This is far more than just what has occurred in this century, but is the result of several generations of people working extremely hard and growing Canada into what it is today. People have literally built Canada through blood, sweat, and tears. Several people have even given up their health or lives by working on large projects, such as Canada's railways or fighting in international wars on other continents. I know firsthand how hard my parents, grandparents, and their parents worked to make a living and provide for their families. Yet, they rarely complained. The people of Canada are arguably its greatest resource. However, there are other things that make Canada a treasure. Several of these are not a result of anything we have done, but instead is sheer fortune that has been granted to us through the geographical features of the land where we reside. We have created amazing cities and built incredible structures, museums, and landmarks. Canada has created some of the world's most amazing national and provincial parks, of course, with a little help from nature. Canada has an incredible network of roads and highways and electricity corridors. Our largest cities have office towers that reach upward to great heights. Canada also has some of the world's best universities and technical schools, but none of these were built overnight. They took decades to construct and refine, some more than a century. Considering all these aspects of modern-day Canada and the myriad of decisions and efforts that have brought us to where we are, what is Canada worth? What is the value of Canada's assets? Often the value of something is subjective. Value can come from what you can sell something for on the open market, but it can also come from a personal emotional attachment. Canada's value comes from more than just its physical attributes. For this list of Canadian assets, I'm including what I perceive to be the personal value in addition to its physical value. This comes from value that is accumulated over generations. This is why the value put on each of them is far more than its market value. Even though I mentioned before that people are most likely Canada's greatest asset, I won't put a value on them since people can move around and it's almost impossible to put a number on someone's worth. However, I will start with institutions that help to make people what they are. These are Canada's schools, universities, and technical colleges. For all the refinement, specialization, diversity, and development, I value our educational institutions at $100 trillion. Some of this expertise, such as research and certain agricultural methods and groundbreaking drugs, can only be found in Canada. Next, let's look at Canada's natural resources. This includes oil and gas, minerals such as potash, uranium, and lithium, lumber, and iron and metallurgical coal, which is used in the production of steel. I value these commodities at $500 trillion. This includes existing value and potential value. For agriculture and fisheries, I'm also considering both the current and potential value. This takes into consideration the regional climates that make these industries proliferate. I value these industries at $200 trillion. Next comes the Canadian forests. These are vast and make up about 10% of the world's forested land. Canada is home to 30% of the world's boreal forests. Because of its huge percentage, I treated Canada's forests separately from other natural resources. I value Canada's forests at $100 trillion. Of course, we have to look at Canada's large area of water bodies. Freshwater accounts for about 9% of Canada's total area. Canada's freshwater accounts for about 7% of the world's renewable fresh water. However, when you consider glaciers and underground aquifers, this number rises to 20% of the world's quantity. Although more methods are being employed to desalinate ocean water, freshwater is still one of the world's most valuable resources. For this reason, I value Canada's water bodies at $500 trillion. Next, let's consider Canada's east and west coastlines. These coastlines are gateways to other countries, including Asia and Europe. In addition to tourism found on both coasts, there are a number of ports that connect Canada with other nations by facilitating the exchange of goods. It also allows exchange of certain goods between the United States and Mexico, Canada's North American neighbors. The tourism industry, which includes local activities and excursions by small boats or cruises, is also an important part of both coasts. For these reasons, I value Canada's east and west coastlines at $200 trillion. Canada also has some of the world's best national and provincial parks. Several of the features found in our parks are impossible to reproduce. They were created by natural forces and are unique. Our parks are destinations for people from around the world. The scenery in many of our national parks is second to none. For this, I value our provincial parks at $250 trillion and our national parks at $300 trillion. The next Canadian feature is near and dear to my heart since I live in the province of Alberta. I am referring to the Canadian Rocky Mountains. Due to its beauty and several accessible locations for sightseeing, nature excursions, and tourism, I put the Rocky Mountains in a separate category. The Canadian Rockies, with its high mountain peaks and crystal clear lakes, is truly one of the world's most amazing creations. For this, I value the Canadian Rocky Mountains at $200 trillion. The next area I want to quantify is Canada's numerous tourist areas. I separated these from the National Provincial Park category since not all our tourist areas are in parks and because they stand on their own. There are far too many tourist areas to create a comprehensive list. However, here are some of the more popular tourist sites. These include Niagara Falls, Green Gables Heritage Place on Prince Edward Island, numerous lighthouses and beaches in the Maritime Provinces, the Canadian Museum of History in Gatineau, Quebec, the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ottawa, Ontario, a number of preserved historical areas of cities such as the Historic District in Quebec City, the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Cypress Hills Interprovincial Park in Saskatchewan, the Royal Tyrrell Museum near Drumheller, Alberta, Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton, Alberta, the National Music Centre in Calgary, Alberta, the towns of Banff and Jasper in Alberta, Kootenay National Park in southeastern British Columbia, Stanley Park in Vancouver, British Columbia, the town of Whistler in British Columbia, Kluane National Park and Reserve in the Yukon. This only scratches the surface of Canada's tourist destinations. There are 22 Canadian destinations on the World Heritage List. This includes the Historic District of Quebec City, the Canadian Rocky Mountain Parks, and Kluane National Park mentioned above. I value Canada's tourist destinations at $200 trillion. I can't forget about Canada's northern coast, the Arctic coast. The northern coastline is about 162,000 kilometers long. In addition to being home for many of Canada's Indigenous people, it is an area with vast resources which are only starting to be explored. Some of these are precious metals such as gold and silver, minerals such as uranium, cobalt, and lithium, oil and gas, and rare earth elements. Much of the Canadian Arctic has not been explored due to environmental concerns and the harsh climate. Because of these resources, the area is also of great interest to Russia, the United States, Denmark, and Iceland, among others. Due to its pristine nature and potential for resources, I value the Canadian Arctic at $500 trillion. Finally, I'd like to mention Canada's cities and towns. Canada's cities and towns have been developed over the past 100 to 300 or more years. A special note is just how quickly they have been growing over the past 20 to 30 years. Alberta, for example, has grown from 3 million people in the year 2000 to 5 million people in 2024. A 67% increase. The 6 largest Canadian cities would be in the top 12 cities by population when Canada and the United States are considered together. Canada's cities are vibrant, multicultural, innovative, and contain a significant amount of green area. Most cities have extensive bike networks and public parks. Although still a problem, crime is relatively low in Canadian cities and towns relative to many other cities around the world. In general, Canadian cities and towns feel safe and have police forces that are not threatening. Canadian cities have extensive transit networks which are continually being improved. Several of Canada's cities are business hubs with impressive office towers and industrial parks. They contain art galleries and museums, restaurants serving food of several nationalities, and have welcoming organizations. In general, Canada's people are friendly relative to other nations. Also, most regions in Canada are set up for internet access, including free Wi-Fi in coffee shops and public areas. Canadian cities and towns also have many recreational facilities. Everything from swimming to soccer to dance. For these reasons and several more, I value Canadian cities and towns at $250 trillion. Here is my list of Canadian assets by category and the values I have assigned them. All of these Canadian assets contribute to what makes Canada, Canada. They are the result of an accumulation of effort, decision-making, and values that have occurred not over years, but decades and even centuries in some cases. Although much of the growth has taken place in the last 100 years, it started with explorers and pioneers who forged a relationship with Indigenous peoples. It grew with the development of national railways and road systems. It expanded by building infrastructure for water and power and heating. It improved through technological advancement. It diversified by welcoming people and their cultures from all areas of the globe and helping them integrate into society. In total, my evaluation of Canada works out to be $3,300 trillion, or $3.3 quadrillion. To put this in perspective, Canada's national debt has ballooned to 1.25 trillion Canadian dollars. The United States debt is around 33 trillion US dollars, or about 47 trillion Canadian dollars. Therefore, you'd have to pay off the United States debt each and every year for 70 years to pay for Canada. Oh, and did I mention that the price is going up by about a couple $1 trillion every year? It's a hefty price tag, but an incredible value. So if President Donald Trump or anyone else wants Canada, first you have to respect what the Canadian people want. If there is some way that an agreement could be reached, the country is not cheap. So if I were you, I'd start saving.